The sky was not blue anymore, it turned silver as a giant ship came closer to Earth. Everyone looked up, the clouds moved apart like curtains, and then the ship stopped in the air. People on the ground could not believe their eyes. Soldiers stood in lines, cameras flashed from all sides, news reporters shouted into their microphones. The world had been waiting for this day for years. Inside the ship, Princess Jera stood tall, her long silver hair touched her waist, her eyes glowed purple, her skin was soft blue, and her dress looked like shining metal. She was the daughter of the High Queen of the Star Empire, and this was her first visit to Earth. She had been trained for years to act royal, to act cold, to never smile, to never touch anyone. Outside her own kind, she walked toward the ramp. Behind her walked 4 guards in dark armor. Their steps made no sound, but their faces looked like stone. The ramp opened with a soft hum, and a bright light came out from the center of the ship. It touched the green grass below and turned into a glowing path. Captain Ryan stood at the front of the human welcome team. He was tall, with short brown hair and a calm face. He had been chosen by the world leaders to welcome the alien guest because he had once saved a crew in space, and because he was kind and brave and spoke more than 10 languages. As Jera walked down the ramp, everything became silent. Not even the wind dared to blow. Her feet touched the earth, and she looked around. Her face was still like ice. Her eyes searched for the one who would bow to her or raise a hand in salute. But something strange happened, Captain. Ryan stepped forward. He had no weapons, no helmet, just a friendly smile on his face. He looked at her with honest eyes, and before anyone could stop him, he opened his arms and hugged her. The world stopped breathing for a moment. Jera froze, her eyes wide. Her guards took one step forward, but did not move more. The humans around the field whispered in shock. The camera zoomed in and broadcast the moment live to every corner of the planet. Hera did not hug back. She stood still as a statue, her hands by her side. Her heart beat fast, faster than ever before in her life. No one had ever touched her like that. No one ever dared, not even the sons of powerful kings or champions of war. And now this human, this simple man, had placed his arms around her without fear, without shame, without permission. Ryan stepped back slowly. He looked at her face and said one sentence, his voice calm and full of warmth. "Welcome to Earth, Princess. We are happy you are here." Jera did not speak. She looked at him like he was a strange creature. Her brain tried to understand what just happened in her culture. A hug was a deep act of connection. A hug was given to family, to mates, never to strangers, never in public, never at first meeting. Her heart said one thing, her training said another. She turned around without a word and walked back up the ramp. The guards followed. Without speaking, the ramp closed behind them. The bright light faded, and the crowd on Earth did not know what to do. No one clapped. No one spoke. They all looked at Ryan and waited. Inside the ship, Jera stood in front of a tall mirror. She looked at herself, her face still calm, but her mind full of questions. What did this mean? Why did the human touch her? What did his words mean? Why did he not follow the ceremony? Why did his arms feel warm? Why did her heart beat like that? A voice spoke behind her. It was one of her guards. He asked softly, "Should we prepare a message of insult to the humans for their act of disrespect?" Sarah raised her hand slowly. "No," she said, "not yet." That night, all the news stations played the same moment again and again. The hug, the silence, the face of the alien girl, the calm voice of the human captain. People on Earth had different opinions. Some called it beautiful, some called it a mistake. Some feared war, some hoped for peace, but deep inside the giant ship above Earth, a young alien princess sat alone in her room. Her fingers touched her arm where the human had held her. She closed her eyes and whispered something no one could hear. What a strange way to say hello. And somewhere on the ground, far below, Ryan looked up at the stars with a small smile on his face. He did not know if he had made a friend or an enemy, but he knew one thing, that hug had changed something forever. Jera sat on a floating chair inside her private chamber. Walls around her glowed with soft blue light. Air smelled like clean ice, and the silence felt heavy. Her fingers moved slowly over a control panel. Words in her language appeared on the screen. All reports were clear. Her health was fine. Atmosphere levels were safe. Earth was peaceful, yet her mind was not. She kept thinking about the human who hugged her, his face, his voice, his warm arms. She had read about humans before. She had watched thousands of Earth videos. She had studied their language, their history, their war and peace, but never had she read that a human would touch a royal guest without asking, never had. She seen a captain hug someone from another world on the first meeting her. Guards waited outside her room, their faces still cold, their voices silent. They were trained to protect, not to speak unless asked. One of them had already sent a report to the High Queen. The hug was mentioned, the shock was explained, but Jera had told them to wait. No response would be sent until she decided. Far below, the ship Earth leaders gathered in a private hall. Screens showed Jera's ship floating above the city news channels. Kept asking questions, experts gave wild theories, but none knew the truth. They had only seen the hug, not what it meant to her captain. Ryan stood in a side room, his arms crossed, his heart unsure. Some told him he had done wrong, others praised him for kindness. He did not care about praise or blame. He only cared about the alien girl who looked at him with eyes full of questions and fear. He wished he could explain what the hug meant to him. It was peace, it was hope, it was a human way to show welcome. Azera opened a book on her screen. She searched for Earth customs, hugs, kisses, bows, handshakes, so many ways to greet, so many meanings, some soft, some strong, some full of love, some just habit. She saw pictures of people hugging after long wars, people hugging in joy, people hugging strangers in sorrow. Her eyes stayed on a photo, a human child hugging a lost dog, both happy, both safe. She leaned back, closed her eyes, her lips moved slowly. She whispered something, her voice almost gone in air. Maybe he was not wrong, maybe I was not ready. A soft chime broke the silence. It was her personal assistant, a machine shaped like a flower. It floated close and spoke with a gentle tone. Princes, the human leaders request a message of peace. They ask for your reply. They wish to understand what happened, and they want no worse. Hera stood up, her dress glowing like the sky before rain. She walked to the center of the room. She touched the light cube on the floor, and the space around her changed. Walls melted into stars, planets moved in silence, and a screen formed in front of her. She recorded a short message, her voice calm, her face like ice again. People of Earth, your greeting was different. We are not angry, we are only confused. We need time to understand your ways. We will remain in orbit. Until then, thank you for your welcome. I am Jera, daughter of the High Queen. She ended the message and looked out the invisible window. Her ship's walls could show any view she wanted, and now she chose to see Earth again. It was large and full of colors. White clouds, blue water, green land, so much life and yet so much chaos. Captain Ryan saw her message on the big screen. He listened closely. His heart felt strange. Her words were not warm, but not cold. They were not soft, but not hard. He saw a small space between the lines, a space that said, maybe there is hope. He walked outside, looked up at the sky, stars above, city lights below, and his own thoughts somewhere in between. He had made history. Without knowing, he had touched the unknown, and now the unknown was thinking about him. Hera walked into her meditation room. It was full of soft lights and floating stones. Each stone hummed with a sound only she could hear. She sat cross-legged, closed her eyes, and let the sound speak to her, not with words but with feelings. Her heart opened slowly, and in the quiet she saw the face of the human again. This time he did not scare her. This time she did not freeze. This time she almost smiled. The council aboard her ship waited in another room, alien leaders with long robes and glowing eyes. They argued softly. Some said, leave at once, some said attack, some said observe, but none had the power to decide. Only Jera could choose. She entered the room. Slowly, her voice steady, her eyes calm. We wait, we watch, we learn. No move without reason, no fight without cause. We came for peace, we hold to peace. Her words were final, her tone like stone. They all nodded without reply. Back on Earth, children watched the hug again and again. Some laughed, some cried. Artists drew paintings, poets wrote words. People felt something they could not name, and in the middle of it all, two beings from different stars thought of one another without fears. Hera stood near her window again and whispered, maybe this planet is not so strange, maybe the human is not so foolish, maybe the hug was not a mistake, maybe, just maybe, it was the first step. The wind moved gently across the Earth embassy. Garden lights danced on the leaves like tiny stars, and soft music floated through the air. Flowers from both Earth and alien worlds stood side by side, glowing in soft colors and spreading sweet scents. Guards stayed hidden behind trees, their eyes sharp, but their faces calm. This place was chosen for a special meeting, and no one else was allowed. Inside, Captain Ryan walked slowly between the tall trees, his hands behind his back, his steps light. like he was walking on clouds. He wore a simple, black jacket with no medals, no signs of rank. He did not want to look like a soldier tonight. He wanted to look human, only human. He followed the path of lights that curved like a river through the garden, until he saw her standing near a silver fountain. She was not wearing her glowing dress from the landing. She wore something simple and soft, a long white robe with threads of silver, and her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders like waves of moonlight. Zara did not turn when she heard his steps, but she spoke, her voice like a calm stream. "You came without guards," he answered with a smile. "You came without anger." She turned slowly, her eyes watching his face closely, her tone still firm. "I wanted to see if you would come alone. I wanted to see if the hug was a trick." Ryan looked at the fountain. Water flowed in circles without end, and he said gently, "I would never use kindness as a weapon, not against you, not against anyone." Zara took a small step closer, her hands folded in front of her. She asked, "Do you know what a hug means to my people?" He nodded a little. "I read about your customs after the meeting. I know I broke protocol. I know I crossed a line, but I also know what a hug means to humans. It means you are not alone. It means we are friends, or at least we want to be." She looked up at the stars visible through the glass roof of the garden and whispered quietly, "And what if I told you that no one has ever hugged me before? Not even my mother, not even my teachers, not even my future matron." Felt a weight in her words, a pain he did not expect. He stepped closer and said softly, "I did not mean to hurt you. I only wanted to make you feel welcome. You looked so far away. I just wanted to reach you." Jera walked to a flower from her world. Its petals moved slowly, opening and closing like breathing. She touched it gently and said, "My people do not show feelings in public. They believe emotion is weakness. They believe cold minds make strong leaders, but sometimes I wonder if that is true." They walked together without speaking, just steps in silence. Stars above, lights around, soft wind between them, and a growing thought inside both hearts. Maybe different is not always dangerous. Maybe alien does not always mean enemy. Zara stopped under a tree with leaves like silver feathers. She looked at Ryan and asked, "Do you think your people can understand us? Do you think we can understand you?" Ryan smiled and said, "I do not know, but I think we can try, and that is how all great things begin, with someone who tries." She looked into his eyes, searching for a lie, for a trap, for anything false. But she found none. She found warmth. She found truth. She found something new, something rare, something not in her training, not in her books, not in the stars. She had crossed. Suddenly a soft chime rang from her wrist, a signal from her ship. Her guards were checking on her location. She raised her arm and replied, "I am safe. Do not disturb." Again Ryan watched her closely and said, "You are brave, more than you know." Zara turned to leave, but then paused. She looked back and said, "You should not have hugged me, but I am glad you did then." She walked away into the light path, her figure fading between trees and flowers and shadows. Ryan stayed under the tree, his heart full of thoughts. He had not planned this, he had not expected this, but now he wanted more. Not more power, not more fame, just more moments like this, more talks, more walks, more truth. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe the universe is not so big. Maybe we are not so far. Maybe peace is not a dream. Maybe it begins in a garden with two people who talk." And far above in the ship, Jera sat alone again. But this time she smiled, not because she was told, not because it was polite, but because something inside her changed, something small, something strong, something called hope. Asterisk. The sun was high in the sky when the grand event began. Earth and the stars watched together as a new moment in history unfolded. People gathered in every city. Large screens showed the same live image. The stage was set in the heart of the capital. Flags from many nations waved in the air beside the symbol of the alien empire. Music played softly and the smell of flowers filled the breeze. Princess Jera stood at the center of the stage. Her dress shimmered like fresh snow, her head held high, her face calm, her eyes sharp. Beside her stood Captain Ryan, dressed in formal black with a blue sash, the symbol of peace on his chest, his hands folded and his voice silent. Leaders of Earth sat in front of them. Behind them stood guards from both worlds. News cameras floated in the air, catching every angle, every blink, every breath. This was to be a joint speech, one voice from each world, one message for all: peace, unity, future. Zara touched the small disc behind her ear. It was a translator device, one of the finest in her fleet. It had been tested many times before. It was built to understand more than 50 languages and speak all. of them with perfect tone. She nodded at the technician and stepped forward. The crowd became still. The world waited. She opened her mouth and began to speak, her voice soft but clear. Her words deep and poetic in her native tongue. People looked at the screen where subtitles appeared. Her words spoke of stars and rivers, of old battles and new hopes, of pain and healing, of hands once closed now reaching out. It was a message written with care, shaped by heart. But then the screen blinked once, then twice. The letters turned to lines, then nothing. Her voice continued, but the crowd began to murmur. The translator device gave a sudden beep and stopped. Her words now were only sounds. To human ears beautiful but unknown. Ryan saw the confusion grow. He looked at the technician, who was now pale and sweating. He saw leaders whispering into earpieces, guards holding their breath, citizens looking at each other with fear and doubt. Sarah paused for a second. Her eyes narrowed. She touched the disc again, but it stayed silent. The light inside had turned red. She looked at the crowd and saw their eyes drifting, their hands moving, their heads shaking. She felt something inside her, something tight, something sharp, fear maybe, or shame. But then she heard a voice behind her. It was Ryan. He stepped forward slowly and spoke, not with a device, not with notes, but with his own voice, loud and calm. He said, "She speaks of peace not as a dream, but as a promise. She speaks of stars and how they watched us from far. She speaks of wounds and how time can heal them. She speaks of the hug, not as a mistake, but as a door." People grew silent again. The cameras turned to him. Jera looked at him with wide eyes, and for the first time she did not feel alone on stage. She felt seen, she felt helped, she felt something more. Ryan kept speaking. He said, "She tells us that war builds walls, but peace builds bridges. She tells us that fear is loud, but hope is stronger. She tells us that this is not the end, but only the beginning." Zara listened, her heart soft, her mind quiet. She watched the faces in the crowd change from worry to wonder, from cold to warm, from stranger to friend. When Ryan finished, the silence stayed for a moment. Then hands began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, stronger waves of sound filled the air like thunder and rain, mixed into one. Voices. Hera stepped back, her face still calm, but her eyes wet just a little. She looked at Ryan and nodded, not with form, not with rule, but with something real, something simple. Later, in the ship, the engineers worked on the translator. They found the problem, a small crack caused by a strong radio pulse from Earth. No one was blamed, no one was punished. Zara sat in her room holding the broken device in her hand. She looked at it and then placed it on the table. She did not need it now, not today, not tomorrow, maybe never again. She turned on a screen and watched the replay of the speech. She watched Ryan's face, his words, his hands as he spoke. She felt the sound not just in her ears but in her chest. He did not need to speak her language to carry her meaning. He did not need training to hear her soul in the quiet of the ship. She whispered, "Maybe connection is not made with wires or waves. Maybe it is made with heart and courage and trust." And on Earth, Ryan sat alone in his room, a gift in his hand, a small flower from the alien garden, its petals still glowing. He smiled and whispered, "I did not just speak for her, I spoke with her." The sky was clear that morning, no clouds, no noise, no wind, just quiet and light. The desert stretched in every direction, gold and red sand under a pale sun. A strange silence filled the air, as if the world was holding its breath. Captain Ryan stood in the center of a large circle drawn into the ground, lines of white dust-shaped ancient alien symbols. He wore light armor provided by the alien team. Nothing heavy, nothing sharp, only protection for heat and pressure. He carried no weapon, no tool, no device. His hands were empty and his heart was full of thoughts. On the edge of the circle stood the alien observers, tall, thin, covered in silver robes, their faces hidden behind masks that showed no emotion. They came from Jera's ship, each one chosen by her council to watch the trial. One of them held a stone staff and tapped it 3 times on the ground. Jera watched from a platform above. She wore her royal dress again, but her expression was softer now, her eyes not cold, not sharp, but searching. She held a thin rod in her hand and used it to control the trial field. She was the one who activated each part. She was the one who could end it. She was the one who would decide if he passed. Ryan looked up at her. Their eyes met for just 1 second, no words, no signal, just a moment. Then the trial began. From the ground rose 4 stone pillars, each one humming with light. One turned red, one blue, one green, one white. A voice from the staff echoed through the space. "The first test is Of balance, not of body, but of thought, walk the path between fear and pride, reach each pillar without losing center. Glowing bridge formed in the air, thin as a line, wide as a hand. Ryan stepped onto it, his boots shaking dust loose. He walked slow. Each step careful, the bridge moved gently with the wind. He looked down, but not too long. He looked ahead, but not too far. He let his mind stay calm, steady, focused. He touched the first pillar, and it glowed brighter red, turned to gold, blue to silver, green to white, white to clear. Then the bridge faded, and he stood on sand again. The second pillar cracked open and released a cloud of gas. It wrapped around him cold and thick. His skin burned, his eyes shut. The voice spoke again. The second test is of pain, not of body, but of will. Do not move. Do not cry. Do not fall. Ryan stood still, his fists tight, his breath slow. The gas burned his face, his arms, his chest, but he thought of Jera, he thought of her voice, her eyes, her message, and he did not move. He did not cry. He did not fall. The gas faded, and the third test began. The sand opened, and a beast rose tall and wide, with glowing eyes and sharp claws. It roared, but no sound came, only vibration. The ground shook, the air turned dry. The voice return. The third test is of fear, not of danger, but of choice. Will you fight? Will you run? Or will you stay and trust? Ryan did not raise his hands. He did not take a step back. He stood still and said nothing. The beast came closer, then stopped. Its eyes changed color, then it bowed and sank back into the Sanjera, pressed her fingers against the control rod, her heart faster. Now not out of fear, but something else, something warm, something alive. The last test began. The sun above turned dark, the light dimmed, a shadow fell across the circle, and Ryan could not see, not the sand, not the sky, not himself. He was alone in total dark. The voice was silent this time, no rule, no hint, no instruction, just black around and silence within. He sat on the ground, closed his eyes, and waited. He did not shout. He did not panic. He waited with hope in heart and calm in soul. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, then a soft light touched his hand. A small sphere of warmth floated near his chest. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. The sun returned, the shadow was gone, and the circle was whole. The voice came back. The final test is passed, not by strength, not by speed, but by heart. The trial is complete. The choice is Matishera walked down from her platform. Alone, her guards stayed behind her, hands empty, her head low. She stopped in front of Ryan and looked into his eyes. He looked back, his body tired, his skin burned, but his spirit strong. She said one line only, "You are not like the others." He answered with a quiet voice, "And you are not who I feared." The wind moved again, the sun rose higher, and in that circle of ancient sand a human and an alien stood, not as enemies, not as symbols, not as rulers, but as something new, as something possible. Asterisk. The stars outside her window were quiet. The ship moved slowly above. Earthlights from the cities below blinked like messages from another world. Jera stood alone in her private chamber, her hands folded behind her back. Her long silver dress touched the floor without sound. The silence in her room was deep like water with no ripple. She had not spoken much since the trial. She watched the videos again and again. Ryan standing in fire, Ryan facing the beast, Ryan choosing silence in darkness each time. Her heart beat a little faster each time her mind whispered new thoughts. The High Queen had sent a message that morning, a royal order with no space for debate. Return home, your mission is complete, the council waits, your report is due. The alliance is stable, the humans are not a threat. Terra read the words without reaction, but deep inside something moved, not fear, not anger, something else. Something without a name, something that made her question not Earth, not humans, but herself and the other. Room, her guards packed her things, they folded her robes and cleaned her tools. They whispered about the trial, they spoke of the human with surprise and respect. They had seen his face, they had felt his strength, they had heard his silence. On the surface of Earth, Ryan stood on a rooftop watching the sky. He knew the ship would leave soon. He did not send another message. He did not try to stop her. He just waited with hope in his heart and quiet in his eyes. Small device on his wrist blinked. One soft light, a private signal, a call from her ship without words, just a pulse. He walked to the embassy where the alien gate stood, tall, silver, and round its center glowing with light. Guards stepped aside without questions. His name was already on the list. He stepped inside and found her waiting in a round chamber full of stars. The walls showed galaxies spinning slowly. The floor was clear like glass under his feet. Stars moved in silence. She stood at the far end near a floating screen. Her face calm, her voice quiet. "The ship leaves in 1 hour. My orders are clear. I must return. I must speak to the Queen. I must close this chapter." Ryan nodded, his hands behind his back, his voice low. "I understand." She turned to him, her eyes deep with questions. "And what if I do not want to return? Not yet, not like this? What if I want to stay and understand more?" He looked at her without surprise, his words soft and steady. "Then stay, not for me, not for Earth, but for yourself." Sarah walked closer, her steps light, her dress moving like air. "I fear what they will say. I fear what they will do. I fear I will be called weak for thinking, for feeling, for pausing." Ryan took one slow breath and answered, "Strength is not in leaving, it is in choosing your own path, even if that path is alone." She closed her eyes for a moment, the silence between them warm, not heavy, not cold, just full of meaning. Then she opened her eyes and asked, "If I stay, will I be welcome?" Ryan smiled for the first time in days. "You already are." She looked at her hands glowing slightly with soft light, the same light that came during the final test. The same light that touched her when he spoke on stage, the same light that now warmed her fingers. Time passed fast. 1 hour became 30 minutes. The ship began final checks. The crew waited for her. Command engines started to hum. Lights turned red, green, yellow. The voice of the pilot spoke in her ear. "Waiting for your signal." Princess Shara touched the crystal panel in the center of the room. Her fingers moved but did not press send. She turned and faced Ryan again. "I cannot promise what comes next. I cannot promise peace forever or answers for every question." He nodded. "I do not need promises. I only need truth." She smiled, not with lips only, but with her whole face, a rare smile, a royal smile, a human smile. She touched her ear and said one line, "Tell the Queen I will return when my heart is ready, not before then." She turned off the signal. The engines powered down. The lights dimmed. The ship did not move. The guards outside said nothing. The crew inside said nothing, but all of them felt something change, something big, something real. Later that night, Jara walked in the human garden, the one where they first spoke. The flowers now in bloom, the lights softer, the air cooler. She sat on the same bench where Ryan had waited. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind and the rooftop. Ryan watched the sky again, but this time he saw no movement above. He smiled and whispered, "She stayed." And somewhere in both hearts a door opened, not with sound, not with keys, but with choice, the kind of choice that changes worlds, not with war, not with fear, but with one quiet decision. The air was fresh that morning. The sky was wide and open. Soft light touched every tree, every flower, every building. The garden outside, the human embassy, was full of quiet steps. Birds flew over the silver gate, their wings cutting through the silence. Without fear, without rush, a long path of crystal glass stretched from the main hall to the center garden. 2 flags stood at the end, one of Earth and one of the alien empire. Both fluttered without wind, as if moved by something else, something unseen. People had gathered, not just humans, not just aliens, but both together, standing side by side, watching, waiting, feeling something big, something sacred about to happen. No one spoke. No one moved, only hearts beat and eyes watched. Captain Ryan stood near the edge of the path, dressed in white, his hands folded, his eyes steady. He looked ahead, not at the sky, not at the crowd, but at the ship that had returned only hours ago. Its surface still glowing from travel, its shape like a bird in flight. The ramp opened with a low hum, soft and slow, and from inside came light and shadow, and then she appeared. Zara walked down the ramp alone, her dress simple, her hair tied back, her steps, even her face calm, but her eyes full of something new, something clear, something bright. People held their breath. Every screen around the world showed her image. News anchors whispered her name. Artists began to draw before she even reached the ground. She walked the path without guards, without music, without anything except truth. She had made a choice, not for duty, not for orders, but for herself. Ryan stepped forward, his feet firm on the crystal path. They met in the center, between the flags, between the crowds, between the old world and the new one. They looked at each other, not with doubt, not with fear, but with memory, with understanding, with shared silence. Shazera took a small breath, her voice gentle. "I was taught never to act before permission, never to touch before command, never to feel before duty." Ryan smiled, his voice low. "I was taught to follow heart before fear, to reach before pulling back, to welcome before asking why." She nodded once, slow and steady, then she stepped forward, and without a word, without warning, she wrapped her arms around him. The world blinked, the stars blinked, time paused, and space felt soft. She Hugged him not as a guest, not as a stranger, not as an alien, not as a symbol, but as a soul meeting another soul. Her head rested against his shoulder, her arms strong but kind. Her breath close to his chest. Ryan did not move for a moment, then slowly he placed his arms around her too, not with pride, not with surprise, but with peace. The crowd stayed silent, not from shock, but from respect. They saw what this meant, they felt it. Deep inside, this was not a message, this was not a speech, this was a bridge being built, not with stone, not with paper, but with warmth. When they pulled apart, Jera looked into his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. You hugged me once and changed the path, now I hug you and change the world. He nodded and said softly, maybe the world was ready to change, it just needed a reason. Later, in the hall, the peace papers were signed. Earth and the alien empire agreed to open new gates, to send ships, to share knowledge, to protect life from both sides. But what people remembered most was not the pen, not the paper, not the handshake, not the words. They remembered the hug, the soft, silent hug between two beings under the open sky, with flags behind and stars above. Artists painted it, children acted it, leaders quoted it, songs were written about it, books were printed with its image. It became more than a moment, it became a symbol. Zara stayed on Earth for many months, learning, walking, talking, laughing, sometimes crying too. She met farmers and teachers and children and poets. She visited rivers and mountains and small villages. She listened more than she spoke. Ryan walked beside her, not always, not everywhere, but when it mattered, when her eyes needed strength or her voice needed pause. They were not rulers, they were not legends, they were just two people who made a choice and gave others the courage to choose to. One night they stood again in the same garden, stars above, wind soft around the trees. Jera held a small flower in her hand. It was the same kind Ryan had once placed near her seat during the early meetings. She looked at him and smiled this time, not rare, not forced, not small, but full and bright. She said, do you remember when we first met? He laughed a little. How could I forget? I broke every rule. She nodded and said, and I followed none after that. They walked without hurry, their steps light, their hearts quiet. The stars blinked above, not in surprise, but in joy, and somewhere across the galaxy a young girl watched the moment on her screen, her eyes wide, her voice soft. She turned to her brother and said, maybe one day I will hug someone and change something. To the brother smiled and whispered, maybe you already will. And so, hug became history, not written with ink, but written in hearts forever.